Deputy President. It's with quite a deal of interest that I'm rising to speak to this bill today. An interest and curiosity, because I think we still don't yet quite know where this legislation is going to land. And it's of concern that the government has brought on this legislation for debate today while negotiations are still ongoing, because this is a critical issue for the future of Australia, the future of our education systems, achieving equity, achieving fairness, achieving the best outcomes for kids at all schools across Australia is fundamentally critical to the future of our country. So, there's one thing that's clear in terms of the way that the Greens are approaching this, and that front and centre we are being completely guided by what is in the best interests of all school students at all schools across the country. And particularly, we have got the interests of children who are going to public schools, and in particular making sure that we achieve the best outcomes for the neediest public schools. We have got a great opportunity to be reforming schools funding so that it is genuinely needs-based and sector-blind. And that's not where our schools funding is at the moment. Schools funding currently is a complete dog's breakfast.
Order.
Schools funding under the deal that is supposedly the result of the last reviews led by David Gonski, supposedly needs-based and sector-blind. It clearly isn't. We have clearly got— there are carve-outs all over the place. There is not fair, it is not equitable comparing if you're a school student in the Northern Territory compared to a school student in the ACT, for example. So we have got a really important opportunity now, and it's up to us to make the most of that opportunity. So there are some good things that the government has put on the table now. The changes to the architecture so that there is more genuinely needs-based and sector-blind. But clearly, the model that's on the table at the moment, if that's what we ended up voting for, the Greens are not going to be supporting that, because it is not a model that delivers what we need for our school. Clearly, there is not enough money that's on the table at the moment. The mechanisms aren't there to make sure that the states are going to continue to pay their fair share. Because, of course, in our federation, we have got responsibility for education being shared by both the Commonwealth and the states. And it's not going to be any use at all if the Commonwealth increase their funding and allow the states to squib their part of the deal. That we get extra money from the Commonwealth, but the states say, oh, that's good, right, terrific, we'll go and pocket it and not spend it. Clearly, we've got to maintain that nexus. We've got to make sure that there is going to be funding coming, an increase in funding that's required, both from the Commonwealth and from the states. And the other critical factor that the Greens have been arguing for, which was part of the original Gonski review, is having an independent body to overview schools funding into the future, so that it can be genuine, we can trust that we know that it's absolutely going to continue to be fair, equitable, needs-based, sector-blind. So that's what the Greens are continuing to be fighting for, and we will continue to be fighting for and be continuing to put the needs of every school student in Australia at the forefront of our negotiations. And as I said, the critical issue is what's in the best interest for all kids in all schools, but particularly those families who, frankly, do not have the resources to be paying private school fees, and they shouldn't have to. Those children, as much as any other children in the country, they deserve a gold standard education. And our country our country needs them to receive that gold standard education because it's in our national interest. And if you look at how the Australian education system is currently performing on the world stage, our best schools are up there with the best schools in the world. For our best schools, the outcomes of the kids going to those best schools, they are achieving the outcomes that we can be really proud of. But sadly, that doesn't extend through to all of our schools. What we don't have is equity in education, and that's what we need to achieve. And the best performing school systems in the world, such as the Finnish system, are the ones that have that equity, so that you know, no matter the background of a child, no matter what their background, what their family background, how much income their family has, whether they're Indigenous or not Indigenous, you know that they can be getting the resources that are required to enable them to achieve their full potential. And that's what the Greens are fighting for, to be improving equity in our education, and that means making sure that more resources are going to go to the most needy of public schools. I've visited many schools across Victoria in my 3 years as a senator. The most recent one I visited just a couple of weeks ago was Tarneit Secondary College. Tarneit is in one of Melbourne's growth areas, outer western suburbs, and it, despite being in a growth area, despite being a relatively new school, it's only been built within the last decade, it is struggling. It has not had the resources put into it that are required. When I arrived, you arrive and usually at most schools you visit, at least they've got the resources and they feel they've got to be able to market themselves, and you have the grand entrance. Even a lot of our public schools. No, this one, the entrance to Tarneit Secondary College is sort of off the car park, little sign on the gate saying, "All visitors please report to the office." And you look and think, where's the office? There's no building that's obviously going to be one that's got an office there. And you sort of follow the signs, and the office is in a portable. And the office, they expect to be in a portable for many years to come, and it's been in a portable for the whole life of the school. I had a terrific meeting with the principal, who showed me around the school and showed me where they are still lacking in funding, where they need more funding to be able to provide the resources to make sure that all of their kids can achieve their potential, and what they've been able to do with the extra money that's been put into their school over the last 2 years. And in particular, they showed me I met their team of welfare staff working, their wellbeing team, sort of working, their social workers and other staff working to ensure the welfare of all of their students. And they told me some pretty amazing statistics, that in this area, in Tarneit, there are quite a lot of issues that Tarneit as a growth area is facing. It's actually an area that's got a high turnover in population because of the unaffordability of housing right across our cities, even in growth areas. The people that move to Tarneit hoping to find affordable rent find after a while that they can't afford to pay the rent there, and they move even further out. They move to regional Victoria. So lots of transients. You've got lots of low socioeconomic families there. Huge multicultural diversity, lots of newly arrived families. Major student needs. And this is reflected in the fact that they've now got a student wellbeing team of 5 staff, whereas 2 years ago they only had 1. They've got 420 students in years 10 to 12. And of those 420 students, 317 of them last year accessed the services of their student wellbeing team. 3/4 of the students. This is a school that is struggling, that needs more resources put into it. This is the type of school that I've got in my mind when we as Greens are negotiating to get the best outcomes for students and families. The other issue, which again is so critical as to why schools like Tarneit Secondary College we need to ensure get the level of funding that they deserve, is because if they don't, we know that pressure that puts on families to feel that this school actually isn't going to give their kids the best education and they've got competition from local private schools. So then you have the situation where the families that can afford to pay private school fees or will dig really deep, they will miss out on other things because they feel in order to get the best education that they have to send their students off to private schools. So then you get the segregation of the wealthier families sending their kids to private schools and the families that have no option sending their kids to high schools, to our state high school. That's not in the interests of the well-being of our community. That's not going to be delivering the best educational outcomes. We need to have the resources of all of the community feeding into and supporting our public education system. But in order to do that, we've got to make sure that schools like Tarneit Secondary College are funded appropriately. And for me as a Victorian senator, that's what I'm going to be fighting for, to make sure that those schools get the resources that they need, that they're not going to be disadvantaged. And under any needs-based, sector-blind model with an adequate quantum of funding, they're the schools that we're going to be fighting for. I mean, all children deserve the best education possible to set them up for a bright future. Their educational outcomes should not depend on their family's wealth or income or which state they live in. And parents shouldn't have to shop around because they're worried that their local public school hasn't got the resources to educate their kids. Public education should be the gold standard, not a safety net. I mean, I experienced this as well. My two kids both went to local high schools in the western suburbs. One went to Williamstown High School, one to Footscray City Secondary College. They were great schools. But the pressure that I was under when we were choosing schools for my kids, who were reasonably bright kids, the number of my friends who said, "Oh, you should be sending them off to private schools because the local secondary schools aren't going to be able to deliver for them." We said, no, we're going to send them off to public schools, absolutely philosophically committed to send them off to public schools, and they did brilliantly. But many of their fellow students there at Footscray and at Williamstown, they were families from the outer western suburbs who were travelling long distances and where they could to be getting their kids into what they saw was a better public school. That is not a good outcome. We should be ensuring that the families that are living in St Albans, the families that are living in Werribee, the families that are living in Tarneit have got a school that they can be proud of. And so that's why we really need to have this genuine Gonski model of funding. It's absolutely critical for our students. We need that genuine, sector-blind, needs-based model that's prioritising funding to look after the needy schools and kids. And we need to get that investment sooner. And one of the current concerns that we have with the government's legislation is that although there is more funding would be flowing, it's not going to be delivering outcomes to those most needy of schools until 10 years into the future. That is not good enough. It means that a kid in grade 3 today won't have the full funding going to their school until they're at the end of high school. So we need to make sure that we get that greater investment sooner so that we can give every child the opportunity to reach their potential. And we've never had that genuine model. I mean, the current Gillard-Gonski clearly isn't needs-based, and it's locked in funding to the wealthy private schools at the expense of public schools. And the current Turnbull's Gonski 2.0, it's not sector-blind. It's offering certainty to private schools, but it leaves those neediest public schools little chance to be catching up after years of neglect. So the Greens' position is we are continuing to negotiate. There are some very advantages that the government's model is offering, improving the architecture.
Senator Rice, resume your seat, please. Order. Interjections during the presentation. Order. Interjections while the chair is talking is even more disorderly. Interjections while senators are speaking is disorderly. They're entitled to be heard in silence, and that's how we're going to proceed. Senator Rice, have the call.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Clearly, we have got a dog's breakfast at the moment. We are being failed by both parties. Both the models that are on offer. Continuation of the old system is not good enough, whereas the government's current model that's on offer is also not good enough. The Greens will continue to negotiate to get the best outcomes that we need, and that means having a genuine Gonski. It means putting kids before politics. It means making decisions on where we stand on the basis of what is the best policy outcome, not playing political games. I mean, what we've got at the moment, when what Labor are supporting, is not the genuine Gonski. And Labor walked away from that central premise that all schools should be funded on the basis of need. I mean, they promised that no school would lose $1, which sounds great, but it actually means that the wealthiest schools will continue to get more and more money, while those with scarce resources will deprive the least well-off of funds. And it means that we would have the continuation of the disparity, of the inequity in our education system. And the indexation that's on offer under Labor, that's locked into the legislation, means that poorer schools would take more than 100 years to catch up to those schools that are underfunded. Now, let alone the 10 years, 100 years before they caught up to those that are underfunded. And that inequality of opportunity is currently what is locked into law. Clearly, that is not a system that we want to see continue. And an analysis by the Grattan Institute says that Labor's education plan taken to the 2016 federal election would have added megabucks, but still not achieved consistent needs-based funding for over 100 years. And the Labor Party is also, they claim that the Turnbull government's cutting $22 billion from schools over the decade is also a wildly inaccurate claim. It's simply the difference between what Labor promised at the last election, not what is in law right now. And so, I mean, Labor currently aren't in government now, so their promises sound great, but they actually mean nothing now. I mean, if Labor, in order to have certainty over that, they should have locked in that funding before the last election, but before the 2013 election, and they chose not to do that. They chose not to do that. They chose to not lock in that amount because they wanted to use our schools' education and funding for schools in political games, political game playing in the election campaigning. We could have had fairer funding locked in place if the Labor government in the lead up to 2013 had chosen to do so, but they chose not to. But meanwhile, of course, on the other hand, the Turnbull government is claiming that there's a boost in funding of $16 billion over the decade, but this is based on the low levels that former Prime Minister Abbott stripped it back to. Neither of the parties are delivering fair, equitable and actually honest statements about our education system. The two parties are playing politics while our public schools are losing out. We need to be putting kids before politics. So we need to be making sure that we have a system that is genuinely needs-based and sector-blind. We've also got these claims that public schools are going to be receiving a cut under the government's Gonski 2.0 proposal. But in fact, no public school system in Australia will receive a cut under the proposed funding model. The only notionally overfunded public schools in Australia are those in the Northern Territory, but they have been given additional funding under the government's proposed plan, so that their funding is not going to go backwards. Government schools in every state will see their funding increase. I mean, because they're all funded at different rates by the Commonwealth currently, the rate that they increase will be different, and historically underfunded states will increase at a faster rate than those that are closer to the target. So again, we have got some good things that, as Greens, we want to be building upon. I mean, the best outcome is going to be for us to negotiate an agreement that does end up with a genuine needs-based, sector-blind funding system that delivers the best outcomes, that delivers equitable outcomes, that delivers fair outcomes, that gives every kid the opportunity to achieve their potential. And we're going to do that by changing the architecture so that it is genuine needs-based and sector-blind, and putting in the resources so that all schools will be up to the standard that's required to be able to allow kids to fully achieve their potential. Thank you, Madam Acting
Thank you, Senator
Deputy
Rice.
President.